Hi, welcome to my channel. I'm so glad you're here. Today I want to explain to you my process for creating a textured background, and then I'll show you how to journal page on top of the background. So here are the mediums I used for this page. To create the textured background, first I gessoed the page with white gesso. Then after it dried I added Crackle paste in varying thicknesses in random places, and then I let that dry overnight. Next, I spread texture medium down through the center area of the page, and I let that dry for several hours. I watered down some burnt sienna acrylic and brushed it over the texture, and then I wiped it back with a wet wipe, letting that watered down paint sink into the cracks and around the textured part. And then I dried the page with the heat tool. I added more burnt sienna and then some burnt umber in places where I wanted it to be darker. After that dried, I put some black acrylic at the top of the page and sprayed it with water and let it run down the page. It just drips and runs. And then I took my brush and spread some of the wet black paint around the edges and across the top where I wanted it to be darker. And I let everything dry really well before I started the rest, which I will share with you now. I selected a couple of stencils and some collage papers that I wanted to use before I started. I selected things that were in the color range that I thought would go well with the background. Here I'm stenciling the Gears stencil by Tim Holtz using Paynes gray acrylic. The stencil is actually created to fit on a large tag, but it works well in a journal as well. I wanted it to be partly underneath one of my collage images, so that's why I selected the position that I did. I've always had the best results when I use a stencil brush rather than a sponge excuse me, or another type of stenciling tool. I usually pounce and sometimes swirl the brush over the openings, and then occasionally I lift the stencil up on one edge while I hold the other edge to see my results, if it's dark enough or if I need to go back over another area. I'll do that a few times before I say I'm done and lift it off the page. After I finished stenciling, I used the rest of what was left in the stencil brush, which wasn't really very much, and so I drug some paint outward to get some ghosting around the cogs of the gears, and then I used the same brush without reloading to dry brush the rest of the paint over the top of the texture to just give it more depth and some dimension. Next, I used a honeycomb stencil to add some titanium buff acrylic around the page to add a little bit of light. It was looking a little dark to me, so I thought that might help. If I'm not journaling or adding words to my page, I like to add letters in some sort of, as a graphic element, so I add letters in some form, whether it's collage or stencil or stamping. So I grabbed this little alphabet stencil that I've had for about 20 years and added that at the bottom. I used Pearl Black acrylic by DecoArt. Time for some collage elements. Pixabay.com is a great resource for copyright-free images. I get a lot of images there for collage. You can search by elements like illustrations or photographs or documents, so it's a really great resource. Also, the New York Library digital collection, same thing. You can find anything you could possibly imagine there. I'll link both of those below. So I usually always use Liquitex fluid matte medium for collage, but it does have a little trouble with the heavier pieces on this textured surface, as you'll see later. But once it grabs and you push the element down to the page, it usually holds pretty well. I need to get some gel matte medium for that though. So I started here with an image from Pixabay, which is where my steampunk idea started. I pulled a piece of deli paper that I had printed on the jelly plate and then stamped the word on it. I tore off just a part of it to use here because the colors flow so well. I really like how the deli paper just melts into the background when you glue it down. Then I collaged this printout of a postage stamp, which was another Pixabay image. It was part of an old postcard image and I just tore it off. I grabbed another piece of that same jelly print to overlap the stamp image. Someone told me once that it isn't really collage if the elements don't overlap. Now, I don't play by art rules, but that stuck with me for some reason, and I usually try to do that. Here's an image from the New York Public Library digital collection. It's too big, so I just tear off a smaller piece. But after looking at it, it's just not doing anything for me. So I take it away and go look for something else to put in that bottom corner. I come back with a tea-dyed tag that I thought would work, but then I liked it better up closer to the man, so I moved it out of that bottom corner. I go back to my stencils to add some letters into that bottom corner instead. I realized that I had stuck my stencil brush in the water basin, so I used a cosmetic sponge this time. I'm using Paynes Gray to stencil the letters. Last, I decided to use a Tim Holtz paper doll image of a man with a dog. This is another heavier element that takes a little coaxing to get glued down, but I do find if I press it down while I'm drying it, it sticks easier. I decided to use some Paynes Gray acrylic watered down to go over his coat and his hat, and some burnt sienna for his face. The colors bring the grayscale image closer to the color scheme of the page, so he doesn't stand out as much, and I like it much better. Thought I was done, but after standing back and looking at it, I decided to grab the Stabilo All and go around some of the elements and activate them with water just to add a little more depth and some shadows around some of the elements. So that's what I did there.